I feel like I do need to respond to this though, because like
Yeah, I mean, you just posted this
I
theory
literally just made a
with
post about
exhaustive
this.
with exhaustive rationale for why Excalibur doesn't fit. I mean I kind of feel like if you are going on a YouTube channel called 40k theories and you're watching a video called The Legendary Sword of Garrow.
I'm gonna guess
I
you know who Nathaniel Caro
I was
is.
gonna say, I mean,
I mean,
like I have the
going out
vaguest
on a limb
feeling.
here, but
I don't fully blame the guy because from what I've heard with YouTube algorithms, like you want your video to be over 10 minutes to ensure like monetization or whatever.
sure.
But like I don't know, I feel like maybe there's a more like content relevant way to be to be over 10 minutes than being like, let's recap Nathaniel Garrow's life for half the video before we actually get to the legendary sword of Garrow, which is what you clicked on it for.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the explanation of the legendary sword of Garrow in this is like,
And this is
so in
it
the
went in a
book, it
stone,
went in the
therefore
stone and he pulled it out, and then in some
yeah.
like pop culture versions, and by that I mean like movies, the sword and the stone is Excalibur because they cut out all the magic.
Let me hang on, let me set up a watch together.
like, like
Alright, here we go. Let's create a room.
I just Jesus Christ. like
Yeah, it's questionable.
like 13
Really? Why you
minutes
gotta have
of
an
this.
ad?
Like
What the? Oh, here we go.
I
Sorry.
just
I've never used Watch Together. I'm figuring out how this shit works.
I don't even know what that is, so
Okay, here we go. It's a website where you can sync up and watch YouTube videos together. So here, oh wait, that's not the room code.
I was gonna say I think that's like actually
It didn't copy the room code. There we go.
Okay. Should just do my own video. My girl voice alone should attract
At least 10,000 views, yeah.
my high pitched my high pitched little girl voice should attract.
We'll just pass you off as a prepubescent man.
Oh yeah, that'll work.
Yeah.
I'll just squeak every once in a while.
Yeah, and just throw out occasional racial epithets. I mean, you know, if you want it to be accurate. All right,
Yeah.
so you should be in the you should see it, right? The video
Yeah,
and the watch together. It has like a dreadnought. It has Nemiroth in the currently.
I do. Not really sure why Nemiroth's up there, but
It's the dude's channel open. Okay, is it playing?
yes, it is.
Okay, I'm gonna.
I should
down
probably
the volume.
I was gonna say I should probably put the volume into my actual like headphone. That might
Probably.
help.
Hang on.
Yeah, we got
In
that.
battle, Garrow wielded a mighty power sword known as Libertas, a weapon that was said to have been forged long before the events of the Great Crusade.
Yeah, accurate.
But
In
yeah.
fact, the core components of this blade are so
I mean,
ancient
pretty much
that
all
they
we know
even
about it.
predate the events of the Age of Strife,
Right.
and are
But that
rumored to
doesn't-
be even older still by tens of thousands of years.
Okay,
That isn't just.
that is not true though.
Well, there's no evidence for that, is
The
there?
tens of thousands of years one, no. The only thing in the text is that they predate the Age of Strife. That's it.
Right.
It doesn't specifically say hold. And I mean, yes, both of our theories, this dude's and yours, is predicated on it being dating back to like the, mid thousands AD.
Oh, yeah, mine would be like the 500s, but yeah.
Right, 500s AD. So like
4 to 500s, but yeah.
yeah, so sorry, I should not have tried to date. I'm not the turbo nerd who knows this stuff.
yeah.
But like but just, it's not something that's actually supported directly in the text. All it says is just before Age of Strife. So that I don't know where that comes from. That tens of thousands of years number.
In this case, the inscription upon the blade may have originally read Caliburnus, which was the Latinized name of Excalibur.
What?
Okay, so like
yeah, I was waiting for this.
So like the thing is, like, okay, yes, Caliburnus is the Latinized name. Most likely they're talking about Caliburn, which was used by Monmouth and then by Robert Barone, like in earlier texts. But like there is no indication, at least not in any of my reading, that it was ever etched
Your
on the
readings, which
blade.
include at this point.
Yeah, which include like, I mean, I haven't fully read Monmouth yet, but like I've I've read like Vulgate and like there is no indication that there was ever anything written on the blade
Yeah.
at all. And also,
much less Caliburnus, because it
I was
wasn't
gonna
referred
say
to as
much
Caliburnus.
less Caliburnus, because it's literally never referred to Caliburnus in any of the like later, like it's literally only referred to as Caliburn, which even then scholars are like unsure if like the translation is off, because like there have been issues with the translations from Welsh to English, and there's like been messed up translations before, so like yeah. Anyway,
So
there's like no
so it's been
indication
referred
that,
to as Caliburn, but that might not even be.
but that might not even be
There's
because
dispute
Caliburn,
about if that's even accurate.
right? Because Monmouth refers to Caliburn, which like Monmouth did some translations of things from Welsh, and not everything there. And like, and I mean, if we're gonna get that specific, then like Arthur also carries in the very early text, he has like a variety of other weapons, including a spear called literally Ron.
Oh, okay. As in
Like,
Weasley?
yeah.
All
So
right.
like, I'm just saying that like, there's, and like either way, like why would he have Caliburnus on the sword if it's literally never referred to as Caliburn at any
let
other
alone
point?
Caliburnus.
Let
That's
alone
just the Latinate.
Caliburnus, which is the Latinate version. Like, no, that doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. I was waiting to get to this part.
Although there is admittedly little else to support this notion.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
like there's.
I was gonna say
Well,
by little
okay.
else, you mean like.
I was
literally
going to
nothing.
say there isn't little else. There's literally nothing to
There's
support
literally
this notion.
no
in fact.
indication that this, you know.
Yeah.
I mean. And
Like-
and if you're going with the whole theory that this is Excalibur, the thing is, Excalibur, in all stories, regardless of like, is returned to the lake. Like, it's not like it stayed in Britain, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it returns to the fictional realm of Avalon.
Yeah, it's not
So
like
either way,
it's not like King Arthur got buried with it in some of
Right.
the accounts in which he did get buried, rather than going to
to
going
Avalon,
yeah.
right? Like Arthur's body, by like some historical accounts, lies, is buried on the Isle of Glastonbury. Like,
Yeah.
in either way, like the sword is not with him. So even if it was Excalibur, like it got tossed back into Avalon. So then you're assuming that Avalon
Just shat it back out again.
or something. I
Well,
don't know.
in which case, then that would make the whole supposition about it lasting through time even more of like a red herring, because of course it's going to last through time. It didn't.
Right.
It wasn't actually in the real world.
Right, and like
was in
then
Avalon.
why would it be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Guarding Excalibur, though by no means all, have frequently described the sword as being embedded within a large stone or even an anvil, which was impossible for anybody, save for the one man truly working.
Right, but that's not Excalibur though.
Say, but here's the thing, and here's where it breaks down. Being like, well, a number of tales say, actually, it doesn't. Like, literally none of the written tales, unless you're talking about like modern adaptations, and by modern adaptations, I mean like 60s or later. I don't know about T.H. White, because fuck T.H. White, but it's possible. So I mean, like none of the written accounts, and we're talking about the old stuff. So we're talking about Mallory, we're talking about Vulgate, Monmouth, like any of them have the sword and the stone being Excalibur. Now, granted, Mallory can be confusing because Mallory refers to both the sword and the stone, and the sword gotten from the Lady of the Lake as Excalibur. To be fair, Mallory was also high as a kite half the time.
Excellent.
But it's very clear that Excalibur, which is the sword that Arthur wields on a regular basis, is given to him by the Lady of the Lake.
Yeah.
Like, at no point, and also, like, and this image is very, like, because, like, the sword and the stone was also not, like, a random sword that was stuck in a stone somewhere, and people were like, oh, hey, what's this? A sword stuck in a random rock in the
just
middle
like
of the
fucked off
forest?
into the woods.
Yeah, like, the sword and the stone is literally placed there in everything for a purpose. And
Yeah.
its purpose is to, and here's the real kicker and why Excalibur doesn't work, it's a kingmaker. Like,
Yeah.
the entire purpose of pulling the sword from the stone is to prove that Arthur is the true-born king of England.
Yeah.
Like, That's the point.
Yeah, Kyber didn't fail to pull Libertas from the stone because Kyber wasn't the true-born king of Saturnine, you know?
Right, exactly. Like, that's not the reason it happened. And the reason Garrow was able to pull it is not because Garrow was the true-born king of Saturnine, despite his, like, potentially bastard roots.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point is that, and honestly, if you're going to use the argument that, like, well, modern adaptations have it that way, and by modern adaptations you mean movies, because that's what you mean.
Yeah.
In all the movies, again, the whole reason why Arthur can pull the sword from, even if it is a random rock, is because he's the true-born king of England.
And I mean, even if you go with the most, and I could be wrong because I didn't go on your King Arthur adventure with you guys,
Right.
but the only account of Excalibur in which it is drawn from the stone and then re-embedded in stone and cannot be drawn by another person is from the 2017 King Arthur.
2017, which I believe, yes, that is correct. If I remember back to all the movies and stuff that we watched, like that's pretty much the only case. Like,
and also in that case as well, you could make the argument that Excalibur in the 2017 King Arthur, unlike the whole sword in the stone thing, like Excalibur didn't exist as the sword in the stone first. Like Excalibur existed long before it ever went into the stone. The stone was just like an intermediary storage for it, whereas the sword in the stone in Arthurian legend like is specifically for a region for, choosing the king.
Is specifically created with the sole purpose of choosing the king.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's where, like, because, like, look, I can see, because I did the same thing. Like, when you're first reading Saturnine, and, you see Sword in the Stone, and then Garrow draws it out, you're like, holy shit, Excalibur, right? Because, like, that's your first thought. But, like, I immediately, like, I read it, was like, oh my god, Excalibur. And then, like, 2 seconds later was like, I mean, except for not, because Excalibur is not the Sword in the Stone. And then I was like, well, I guess maybe it is because most people think it is, even though it's not in literally any tale.
Yeah.
By that, you mean if you watched a movie. And by that, I mean specifically you watched the movie Excalibur, which came out in the 80s and was also a piece of shit, by the way. And was a very, very terrible adaptation of Mallory. Like, I'll just say that. Like, Excalibur is based off of Mallory, and it's a terrible one. Like, it's not good at all.
Yeah.
And so that's generally what people think.
I mean, hell, even the Great Illustrated Classic was specified that Excalibur was from the Lady of the Lake.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, the other thing is, like, the whole Sword in the Stone thing, there was, like, a whole thing about it. Like, there were words written in stone, and, like, swords being thrust into things and only able to be pulled by magical people generally have some sort of, like, high portent attached to them.
Yeah, like they have a purpose behind it.
Right. So, like, and then the thing is, in Arthurian legend, there are multiple examples of swords that can only be drawn by the worthy. But
hence why it's not Excalibur.
Right, hence why it's not Excalibur. But again, all of them have, like, a particular purpose. Like, each sword, the person who draws it is for a particular reason. Like, it's not just random, like, so, like, the whole drawing of the Sword in the Stone, capital TS. Whatever, is, I lost the thread of it there, but is because it's a kingmaker. It's proving that Arthur is the true-born king of Britain and Uther Pendragon's son, and therefore,
Yeah, therefore he can.
Right.
It's a symbolism thing, and that's why he doesn't even end up using it for all that long.
Right, and it actually, in most stories, gets broken pretty quickly in his initial fight against Pellinor, which is why he has to go get this sword and the sword from the Lady in the Lake, which is Excalibur, and is also super important because the sword that he gets from the Lady of the Lake, Excalibur, is also tied to the scabbard, which is equally as important in Arthurian legend.
Yeah, because the scabbard's what makes him invincible, isn't it?
Right, the scabbard is what makes him invincible. Like, Excalibur's good.
Yeah.
The scabbard makes him invincible, and then the two of them together are super important. Like,
it's almost like Thor and Mjolnir in actual mythology, that like he had to have. It wasn't just Mjolnir; it's also this like special strength enhancing belt that he had to wear in order to use it, or something.
Exactly. So, like, having Excalibur by itself
Yeah.
doesn't really do as much, legendarily speaking.
All right, let's finish this out, and then
Okay.
you can pitch the actual
There'll
reason.
be enough to wield it and, by extension, the one true king of Britain to pull free from its
Right,
bondage,
but
which,
okay, yeah, we talked
according
about
to
that.
legend, would be none other than King Arthur.
The one true king of Saturnine.
Likewise, Garrow, as the wielder of Libertas, was also implied to be the only man worthy enough to take up the blade, as
Yeah, but
Kyber,
nothing else.
as mentioned earlier, was himself unable to pull the sword from
Right.
the stone.
But Nathaniel Garrow isn't the one true
This
king
in
of
turn would
anything
also
except my
appear to
heart.
suggest that Nathaniel Garrow, who, as mentioned earlier, was able to swiftly and effortlessly remove Libertas from its stony prison, despite being clad in a relatively modest suit of power armor, could himself be a descendant of the legendary King Arthur, or at the very least, an inheritor of the Arthurian legacy.
But he's not king of Albion.
While power
But he's
armor
not
does
king
indeed
of
augment the
anything.
strength
Yeah.
of those that wear it, such
And
benefits pale
also,
in comparison
Arthur
to
had
those
no direct
afforded
heirs.
by Terminator armor. Although there does exist a possibility, albeit a minute one, that Kyber's failed attempts to pull Libertas free had simply made it easier for Garrow to do so himself.
Right.
So, what, Kyber
But if
loosened the pickle
Libertas
jar?
is
Is that what you're saying?
indeed someone wanted to ask as to what happened to the sword,
Yeah, no, yeah, that last little bit there. Oh, like, so what?
Kyber
He loosened
wiggled the pickle jar enough.
for Garrow, and then Nathaniel was able to pull it because, like, okay.
Yeah. So okay. So the evidence as laid out is, pretty much exactly what our evidence was the first time we read it, which is,
Which
hey,
is
sword went in
stone.
stone. Sword didn't come out of stone. Sword came out of stone when Nice Guy pulled it, and that's it.
Yeah, A plus B equals King Arthur, which, like,
A bit of a jump.
which a bit of a jump, yeah. So, like, I guess the long and short of it is, like, okay, Excalibur is not and is never the sword in the stone unless you're skipping out on large parts of Arthurian legend.
Well,
to
not
truncate
just
a
large
story.
parts, like the actual Arthurian legend.
Right, and so if you're basically skipping parts to truncate a story, which is done in most movies,
Yeah.
because weirdly enough, a lot of movies don't have anything to do with Avalon, probably because it's an extra little bit that you don't need when
Well,
you're
and
trying to
'cause
hurry up and tell a story.
And because Hollywood is allergic to magic.
Also that. So, like, if you're eliminating that, then sure, you go ahead and get rid of the whole Excalibur comes from the Lady in the Lake. Plus the fact that also a lot of them eliminate Pelennor and
Yeah.
or use Pelennor in a weird way anyway, which
Well,
is
and you can correct me if
neither
I'm
here
wrong
nor
here,
there.
but as far as I'm aware, they don't, like, movies never touch on the scabbard either, do they?
No, not any of the ones that I ever saw.
Yeah.
So
And you watched almost all of them, so.
I watched almost all of them. The only ones I didn't watch were, like, the really crappy, like, direct to Amazon or, like, direct to DVD
Oh yeah, the like
ones.
asylum type
So-
ones,
But
which
I
no one can
watched
blame you
one
there.
per decade, and none of them touched on the scabbard, and they all pretty much went with the whole,
Yep.
So, but like, I think to get back to the point, like,
hmm
swords only being able to be pulled by a particular wielder is actually not that uncommon in Arthurian legend. There are at least 4 examples that I can think of right off the top of my head.
hmm
Because I mean it kind of makes sense as a trope, right?
Yeah.
You're centered around knights and swords, and so you have the bear. And I mean, their swords are not the only thing. There's rings that can only be worn by certain people, and particular armor and whatever. But the point is that there's many.
Yeah.
And so if we go back to, like, the evidence for it being Excalibur is that, like, in some movies after 1980, they combined Excalibur with the Sword and the Stone
to save on
shorten
screen.
the storyline, and potentially, like I said, it's potentially T.H. White. I honestly never read T.H. White because, like I said, fuck T.H. White. But in all actual legends, dating all the way back, no,
Yeah.
they're 2 separate entities and are not combined. But there is a sword that does work.
Yeah. Which is the point of all this. So.
Which is the point of all this, is that there actually is a sword in Arthurian legend which can only be drawn by a worthy bearer, and it is a sword in actual stone. But it actually has like a lot more parallels than this particular one, and that would be the sword that is wielded by Galahad on the Grail quest. It's sometimes known as the Sword of the Red Hilt. It sometimes is known as like Balin's original sword. But essentially, there was a sword that was given to one of Arthur's earliest knights of the Round Table. He wasn't technically a knight of the Round Table because there was no Round Table at the time, but
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there. And basically, the sword was offered to all of the knights, and it was said that it could only be drawn from the scabbard by the worthiest
Right,
knight.
because it was carried into court, right?
Because it was carried into court, right, on one of their feast days, as you do.
Yeah. God, that's just like you wake up in the morning and they're like, hey guys, we're having a feast tonight. It's like, ah, fuck.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, crazy things happen at feasts.
Yeah.
So, the knight, Balin, spelled with an I, Balin,
Yeah.
he is able to draw the sword. He's the only one at court that's able to draw the sword. And he draws it, and then the maiden who brought it into court tells him he has to give it back. He refuses, and then basically a long series of hijinks ensue, wherein he's basically cursed because the maiden curses the sword and says that it'll slay like your best friend since he refused to return it. And anyway, all of this culminates in Balin fighting his twin brother, or his brother, whom he does not recognize because the two of them are wearing unknown armor. And they fight
And
each other.
That's Balin with an A, right?
That's Balin with an A. Yep. Yeah. Balan. And they fight each other, mortally wound each other, and both of them, as a result, die of their wounds.
Lovely.
Which is, again, not actually an uncommon thing in Arthurian legend. They quite often fight each other while wearing mysterious armor and then being like, oh shit, it's you. Oh,
You'd think they'd learn after a while.
I mean, you think they would, but, I mean, some people do it on purpose, but,
Oh, well,
So then the sword after that gets taken by Merlin, and essentially Merlin takes the sword itself, replaces the hilt, and sets the sword into like a marble plinth.
You didn't mention that before. He replaced the hilt?
He did, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he sets it into a new hilt, and the hilt itself has an inscription on it that basically says it can only be pulled by the worthy. Or I believe the direct quote is that never shall man take me hence, but only he by whose side I ought to hang, and he shall be the best knight in all the world. So he places it into a marble plinth and basically sets the plinth down into the water to float on a river until such a time that it comes to its rightful owner. So after that, it depends because Arthurian legend timelines are funky, but anywhere between 30 and 40 years pass.
Okay.
And Arthur and his knights are getting ready to have yet another feast. It's Pentecost.
Jesus.
And Arthur's big thing about Pentecost is he never sits down to eat a Pentecost feast until they've had some kind of an adventure.
Okay.
So he and his knights go down, are sitting there, waiting for something to happen because they always just kind of wait for something to happen, which it inevitably does.
Not very proactive fellows.
They're not, but I guess when you have a feast waiting on you and your hall is frequently filled with running hearts and, and anyway, the sword ends up floating by Camelot.
Convenient.
So they all go down. Arthur takes the court. They go down to the water, and they see the sword with the inscription in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And Arthur tells his knights that he wants them to try drawing the sword. So he asks Lancelot first, and Lancelot says, basically refuses and says no because I'm not worthy. This is definitely not my sword. And also that he knows that anybody who tries to draw the sword and fails.
I was going to say he's aware there's a curse on it.
Right. He's kind of aware of the overall curse. And he says anybody that tries to pull it out and fails will be mortally wounded by that sword.
Mm-hmm.
So Lancelot kind of like outright refuses to do it because he's like, no.
Showing for once a bit of intelligence on Lancelot's part.
Yeah, bless his soul. And then Arthur tells Gawain and Percival to do it. And both Gawain and Percival accept. Both attempt to pull the sword. Both of them fail. Right after this, Galahad appears at court for the first time. And Galahad, it should be noted, is Lancelot's son, for those of you who aren't aware.
And he's just like the loveliest boy.
Right, he is. And he is a direct descendant of Joseph of Arimathea, who was the one who took the cup and the spear after Christ's death, and it's a long train of other legends that go beyond with that.
But the important part was Joseph of Arimathea had custody of the Grail.
Right, had custody of the Grail. And so Galahad arrives at court, and he immediately gets the final seat at the Round Table, which is known as Seat Perilous. And it's said that the only knight that can sit at Seat Perilous is the greatest knight in all the world. And in some legends, particularly in, I'm having a mind blank, the dude who wrote in the 1910s.
Well, it is late, so.
Yeah. But in that legend and in some, there's kind of like an unspoken idea that once Siege Perilous is filled, basically there brings about the downfall of the Round Table and the splintering of the Round Table, which eventually leads to the Civil War, which eventually leads to Arthur's death.
And the end of his court.
And the end of
realm.
his court. Right. So anyway, Galahad arrives, sits at Siege Perilous, and then they're like, oh, hey, by the way, just in case, since you are able to sit at Siege Perilous, you want to go try pulling this sword out?
Go pull out this wacky sword.
This wacky sword. So Galahad agrees, goes down, and of course, lo and behold, he's the one able to pull the sword.
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, is that, okay, so that gives us a sword that can only be pulled from the stone by the worthy.
Yeah, by a righteous knight.
By a righteous knight, and Galahad is the most righteous knight. That's why he's able to sit at Siege Perilous. It's why he's able to pull the sword. It's also why he's the only one who actually does achieve the Grail quest. Because Galahad is pure. Like, he's the purest, best, and greatest knight of all of them.
And he's a virgin, which is...
And he's a virgin, which is very important.
I was going to say, which is relevant later.
Bors is only half a virgin, so that's why he only gets halfway to the Grail.
Did he do like in the back door?
Well, he had a bastard once. It was a one-time thing.
How's that? Okay, it's not important.
Yeah, it's not important at the moment. But anyway, what is important to note is that Galahad pulls the sword and is able to because he's the worthy knight, whatever.
Yeah.
The other two that try to pull the sword are Gawain and Percival. Percival is the second most worthy knight in all the realm. He also goes on the Grail quest with Galahad. He does not achieve the full Grail quest, and by that I mean he doesn't like actually get to like witness and drink from the cup and ascend into heaven like Galahad. But he is there with him to the very end, and he's the one who bears Galahad's body away, buries it, and he dies about a year later after going into like solitude.
Gotcha.
Anyway, Percival, who tried to draw the sword, once they start on the Grail quest and failed, once they start on the Grail quest, he and Galahad encounter each other because they actually start the Grail quest initially separately. Percival and Galahad kind of go off separate ways. They encounter each other about a couple weeks into the Grail quest. They're both in disguised armor, and so they don't recognize each other. They ride at each other. Galahad rides against Lancelot first because Lancelot and Percival were traveling together. Lancelot rides at Lancelot, unhorses Lancelot, breaks his spear, rides against Percival, breaks his spear, and takes out his sword to go against Percival.
The titular Sword of the Red Hilt. The
titular Sword of the Red Hilt, the one that can only be drawn by the worthy and will fatally kill anyone who tries to draw it who's not worthy. Draws the sword against Percival, goes to kill Percival, and the sword skips. It hits off against... It should have cut him, like, crown down, like straight through his helmet, but it skips off the helmet and only knocks him off the horse. Which, okay, so then why didn't it kill him?
Yeah.
Well, presumably because, remember, the sword, if we're talking about like magical swords here and curses and memories, the sword started its life as a kinslayer.
Yeah, with Balin and Balin.
With Balin and Balin. And so the theory would be that it remembers brothers and doesn't kill against, the worthy. But also, what's interesting is there's a very similar part with Garrow, where Garrow is on a quest by himself, encounters a strange space marine.
And in fact, he was on a quest by himself for divinity.
Right,
since he was trying to find Keeler.
Right. Encounters a strange space marine that he doesn't recognize. Goes to kill him with Libertas, which, again, both Garrow and Galahad are, big, strong dudes who don't miss with a sword swing.
Excellent swordsmen.
And are excellent swordsmen. And Garrow goes to kill the Imperial Fist. Libertas, which should have been a killing blow, should have, again, almost, and actually a very similar cut, because it should have gone straight through the neck ring of the Imperial Fist and doesn't. Skips and reveals that it's an Imperial Fist and not a traitor knight.
And then thus, yeah, Garrow stays his hand.
Right. Thus, Garrow stays his hand, and So interesting parallel there.
Very interesting,
in my
especially
opinion.
because the method of attack was almost the same stroke.
Right. It's almost the same stroke. It's an overhand stroke straight down to the head.
Yeah.
And but the sword, which in other cases has always been true and is wielded by someone who is extremely skilled, skips and misses.
Yeah.
And then we have Gawain, who also tried to draw the sword and failed. Well, later down the line, after Galahad's death, Lancelot inherits the sword from Galahad after he dies, achieving the Grail quest. And during the Civil War, when Lancelot and Gawain have become enemies due to a blood feud, they end up fighting. And Lancelot doesn't want to fight Gawain because he still loves Gawain. But Lancelot, long story, Lancelot accidentally killed 2 of Gawain's brothers. It was legit an accident.
Well,
didn't mean it to happen. Gawain declares a blood feud on him and basically is unwilling to let it go. So Lancelot's kind of forced into fighting Gawain and mortally wounds him.
With the sword of the Red Hilt. Yeah.
With the sword of the Red Hilt. Which, interesting, because Keeber, whatever you want to call him.
Yep.
Tries to draw the sword and is subsequently mortally wounded with it.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah, so, like... so there is an undrawable sword.
There is an Arthurian legend, a sword that's in stone that is unable to be drawn unless it's by the most worthy knight. Anybody else who tries to draw the sword is subsequently mortally wounded for it, except in the rare case when the sword recognizes
They're like a loyal
brother, and seemingly of its own will refuses to actually deliver a killing stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And is a sword which, has a long history and has also a history of having the hilt replaced. So if we're going with the idea that parts of Libertas...
I don't think you had mentioned that before.
Yeah, so if your idea is that parts of Libertas survived from before the Age of Strife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, theoretically, obviously Libertas is now a power sword.
Yeah.
Which, means the hilt has been at least replaced one time. But it gives us evidence that we have a sword here whose blade has remained true even if the hilt has been replaced multiple times. So, and it retains the original prophecy and the original curse. And then, I don't know, has like an element of will to it, which would kind of work with this. And then it's also wielded by, of course, an honorable,
like the unwavering
knight.
Truest knight.
Right, who follows the path of truth, righteousness, reconciliation.
Yeah, because if you look at it, there have been plenty of Black Shields and people from the Traitor Allegiance do stay true, but like no one is on Garrow's level in terms of like how true he stayed to the Emperor.
Right. And if we, to draw an even further parallel, Galahad, however unwittingly, his appearance at Arthur's court was sort of the beginning of the end, because Galahad appeared, sat at Siege Perilous, drew the sword of the Red Hilt, and then literally right after that, the Grail appeared, which sparked the Grail quest, and the Grail quest splintered the Round Table. Like, all of the knights splintered off, went to complete the Grail quest, and the vast majority of them did not return. Most of them were killed on the Grail quest. Arthur's table was never fully founded again, and then when the remaining knights came back, it led directly after that into the Civil War. Like, the Grail didn't cause the Civil War, but but
it definitely
in a way,
led into it.
It led into it, which, if you think about it, like, Garrow sort of was the herald of the end.
And the Grail quest, which could only be achieved by a single knight, a single hero,
right?
Definitely seems to have a sort of parallel to the Flight of the Eisenstein, bringing the warning back to Terra, which plenty of others attempted to flee, but only Garrow was able to successfully complete that. Yeah. Right,
but was the only one who was able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're talking about somebody who literally lives to serve his king, God.
Yeah.
And he does save a large number of innocent maidens on his journey.
He is definitely a maiden saver.
Nathaniel Garrow has
Yeah.
saved a number of maidens in his day.
Also highly likely to be a virgin too.
Yes.
So
See,
he's
which
got
is,
that purity as well,
he's
that
got
classic,
that
that classic kind of purity. So
right.
yeah.
And and I mean, if you really want to dig into it, which like there aren't, I mean, in no way is Arthur a Roman, but I know a lot of people like to like pull this shit because it happened in the 400s.
Yeah.
But I mean, Garrow does wear a giant eagle on his chest.
He does.
So,
He does indeed.
Um, but I think so. I guess at the end of the day, Libertas actually makes more sense being the Sword of the Red Hilt than it does being Excalibur, because the Sword of the Red Hilt pretty much fits everything that we know about Libertas.
It fits, and not only matches the sword, but also matches Garrow, which
Right.
is the biggest difference between the Sword of the Red Hilt and Excalibur. Because, you could say, okay, well, there's some similarities between Libertas and Excalibur, but the similarities end there. There's nothing similar between Garrow and Arthur at all.
Right. There's literally no similarity between like Garrow and Arthur. Like, I mean, perhaps the only, and it would be a really
Well, they're
thin,
both from England, which is about
I was gonna
the
say
best
they're
you can
both
say.
from England, and I guess technically Garrow gathered some knights around him, which so did Arthur. That's a very thin.
That's thin because, like, I guess I could see, like for devil's advocate here, you could spin it with Malcador in the Merlin position, right? And then Garrow as Arthur. But the problem with that is that Garrow didn't gather everyone of his own accord.
No, he didn't.
Like, he wasn't going out with the plan to gather the Knights Errant. He did it because Malcador told him to, and then even then, he was familiar with some of them, and technically he was the Agentia Primus, so he had authority over all of them. But honestly, Garrow never really interacted that much with any of the other Knights Errant. Like, he would occasionally work with one or two, but honestly, most of his stories was him working alone.
Yeah, honestly, if you want to look at the knight errants who work together the most, it would actually fit better with like Loken, because Garvey did a whole lot more. With,
yeah,
like,
he really did, honestly,
than he did with any of the others. So, and again, like, that goes back to the Galahad parallel, where like Galahad did have a couple, like he was close with Percival and Bors, and they were the ones who were with him at the end of the Grail quest. But like, honestly, Galahad, a lot of it was done on his own, and he really didn't hook up with anybody until the very end of the Grail quest, like right before they actually went like to the final stages of it. The majority of the Grail quest was done on his own. Like, he did it independently.
Yeah. So like, I guess at best you could say, well, he did have a Merlin-esque figure, and he did gather other knights, but yeah, no, that it kind of falls apart when you push at it too hard.
And if we're gonna get really close there, like, technically Galahad also had his own Merlin, because by the time Galahad came around, Merlin was gone.
Yeah.
Merlin had been dead for many years, but he had his own. He actually had a hermit that he knew and had trained him and like taught him how to like be or whatever. So he technically had like his own Merlin,
his own bearded mentor,
like,
kind.
Yeah, set him on his quest or whatever. So, which would actually probably fit better with what's his name, the half herd. But
Yakton.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, a little bit.
Which would work, because Yeah. But, yeah.
So
yeah. So basically, what I'm saying is, yeah, in the initial 2.5 seconds after you read about a sword going into the stone and getting pulled out by Garrow, you think Excalibur. But then, if you really think about it,
and actually know Arthurian mythology.
Right, and actually know Arthurian mythology, and do a little bit of research, which, like, yeah, granted, I do read a lot of Arthurian mythology, but also, like, this stuff is not.
It's only like a wiki or two away.
Yeah, exactly. It's only a wiki 2 away. This is actually the Sword of the Red Hilt.
Yep. And like I said, maybe we're a little too fanish, and we're giving Abnett too much credit, but I don't know. I fully believe like that Abnett would be aware of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So.
and I mean, honestly, like a basic reading of any Grail, like even just Mallory, like all you would have to do is read Mallory
Yeah.
to get the Sword of the Red Hilt. Like I've
Yeah,
read about the
it's
Sword
not
of the
like
Red
it's an
Hilt in
obscure
multiple
thing.
places, but it's not really obscure. Like,
Mhm.
and Mallory is fairly basic reading for, you know, any sort of, you know,
Mhm.
vague interest in Arthur. You're gonna read Mallory, and honestly, it's also a part of any other like Howard Pyle. Oh, Howard Pyle, that's the name I couldn't think
Oh,
of.
is
Yeah,
that
he's
the one
from the
you forgot about?
yeah Howard Pyle, which like basically consolidated a lot of Arthurian legend. Also has a Sword of the Red Hilt, and he's a pretty. I mean, he's a breezy read too. So
yeah, so it's
you know,
accessible. It's not like you
accessible.
got to go crack into Vulgate or anything.
No, I mean I haven't even gotten to Sword of the Red Hilt and Vulgate yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm still working my way through it slowly. I'm sure it's in there, but I just haven't gotten there.
Yep. Well, you've been busy.
So, yeah. But.
Yep.
So, in conclusion.
In conclusion.
Nathaniel Garrow might not actually be Galahad, but he definitely probably wields his sword.
He probably wields the Sword of the Red Hilt and is probably descended from Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea, and you know, by not Galahad, because as we stated before,
Galahad's a virgin. Yep.
So, but you know, yeah.
Yep. His armor protected him from the horrors of the women folk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. All right, we've got two really quick clarifications that are stuck in at the end here because I didn't want to fuck up the flow earlier on since it was all a pretty cohesive conversation. But I did want to clarify about a couple of the specific claims as regards Vulgate and the etching on the blade. So here we go. So was there a sword in the stone in Vulgate, or is that post-Vulgate?
Okay. So in Vulgate, there is a sword in the stone.
Okay.
Which is placed in the stone, presumably by Merlin, although it's more of like a winky wink sort of thing, because basically they're like, who's going to be the king of Britain? And Merlin's like, Jesus will tell us, wink, wink. And then the next day they get up and there's a sword stuck in the stone.
Ah.
Now in Vulgate, it's extremely clear that it was set there, and it's like literally by Jesus for the purpose of choosing the king of Britain. And it literally says, like, on the stone, the writing said that the one who pulls out this storm would be king of the storm, would pull out this sword, would be king of the land by choice of Jesus Christ.
All right.
So this is the sword that Arthur pulls from the stone. And I should note that it's like, it's in an anvil, like, you know, the whole like fancy thing. Now, Arthur retains this sword in Vulgate, and the first time Excalibur is mentioned is a little bit later on when he's fighting a bunch of the kings who refused to surrender to him. And it says, he drew a sword from its scabbard, and it cast a great light as though two tapers had been lit. This was the sword he had pulled out of the stone. And the letters that were written on the sword said it was named Excalibur. This is a Hebrew word that means, in French, cuts through iron, steel, and wood, and the inscription told the truth, as you will hear in the story a little further along.
Interesting.
So this sword in Vulgate was the sword in the stone, is called Excalibur, but at the end of Vulgate, it gets returned to Avalon by being thrown into the lake, in this case by Grifflet, not Bedivere, when Arthur dies.
Okay.
Now, in post-Vulgate, though, which is, like I said, sort of like, because early Vulgate was an amalgamation of a bunch of different monks and a whole bunch of different stories, like, and we lost chunks of it, and chunks were kind of rewritten because of the way that manuscripts were handled back then and whatever.
Gotcha.
So post-Vulgate was an attempt to take kind of like disparate things and bring them together into a more cohesive narrative. And in post-Vulgate, there's a very clear distinction between Excalibur and the Sword in the Stone. The Sword in the Stone is not Excalibur. The Sword in the Stone is the one that's broken, fighting Pellinor. And then Excalibur is specifically given to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake. I do not have the physical copy of Post-Vulgate yet because there are 10 books in that series and each book costs $40. And
at the moment, you're already working your way through Vulgate, so.
Right. So I haven't bought that one yet, but I do know the Post-Vulgate pretty well because I've read like bits and pieces online, and like I said, everything from there forward is based on Post-Vulgate, which is that. So
Gotcha.
Strictly speaking, yes. In the early Vulgate, Story of Merlin,
Mm-hmm.
it says that Excalibur and the Sword and the Stone are the same.
Yeah.
But the rest of the description of Excalibur, its return to the Lady in the Lake, and etc., goes more with Post-Vulgate's
And all the other
Excalibur
writings that are
and all
based
the other
therein.
writings which are based around it. Because if you go back to Monmouth, it seems as though Arthur also received Caliburn, which is Excalibur, from Avalon, from the Lady in the Lake.
Well, and here's the thing too, is that even if Excalibur and Vulgate, the Sword and the Stone is named Excalibur, from the
Right.
sound of it, it doesn't have anything to do with the Excalibur as we know it.
No,
Right?
it doesn't. And the
Like
thing
it's
about
not
Mallory,
I assume it's not magical or anything in the
no,
same way
it's
that
just
Excalibur is. It's just
extremely,
very sharp and cool.
it's just very sharp. And it seems more like, because Mallory calls both the Sword and the Stone and Excalibur Excalibur,
Mm-hmm.
presumably because he's trying to bridge that weird gap
Yeah.
of Vulgate and Post-Vulgate. So he's like, well, technically they're both called Excalibur, but
Yeah.
this one is the one from the Lady in the Lake and this one is not. And the question would be too, and I think that's why Post-Vulgate fixed it, is where would Merlin have gotten the sword from? Because Merlin at the time was not associated with Avalon. So like, where did he just randomly get Excalibur from to stick in the anvil?
Right.
If he was not, So yeah, so basically, and I guess why I'm saying all this is because it's extremely obscure. Because Vulgate is not
To
what
do
people
a
know.
throwback to Vulgate, right?
Right. Vulgate is not really what people know. Post-Vulgate is what people know because that was what Mallory wrote off of. And so basically Post-Vulgate took Vulgate and made it make sense. Mallory took Post-Vulgate and made it make even more sense. And then everybody from there on forward
Kept
was
building,
basically working off of Mallory, which was working off of Post-Vulgate,
which
which was
was
like sort of the definitive
yeah.
King Arthur story that everybody knows and loves. And like I said, if you go back to Monmouth, if you go back to Barone, even if you go back to Detroit, Excalibur is never the sword and the stone, except for literally one sentence in Vulgate. Yes, Excalibur was engraved on the blade in Vulgate, but Vulgate is also specific that Excalibur is I believe it was a Hebrew word.
Yeah, Hebrew word that's like cuts
Yeah,
wood and stone and steel or something.
but yes, Excalibur is engraved on the blade.
In
In
Vulgate,
Vulgate.
just Vulgate though, is the only time it's mentioned as having
As
Excalibur
far as
engraved.
I've been able to tell, yes.
Okay.
And it means, sorry, it's a Hebrew word that means in French cuts through iron, steel, and wood.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because
Yeah.
you did mention that at another point. But yeah, it's
Yes.
just important to note that yes, in Vulgate it did mention that it had Excalibur
Is an
engraved on the
inscription
blade,
on the blade,
not
but it's definitely
Caliburn,
Excalibur,
not
Caliburn,
Caliburnus.
and not Caliburnus.
Yeah,
Exactly.
just Excalibur, and again, only in Vulgate, and Vulgate is kind of like the messy progenitor to the Post-Vulgate, which is
The Post-Vulgate
what
was a
everything
little
is
bit
really based
more.
on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that because always want to be able to back up points.